Cork was probably more prominent in the War of Independence than it was in the Civil War, although at the outset of the Civil War, it played a really important part because it kind of became the de facto capital of this Munster Republic. In terms of why the war was fought, it was fought because the British Empire wasn't willing to allow Ireland to achieve full independence. Some people thought that Ireland needed to achieve full independence and were willing to fight for that. Other people thought that the self-government and the degree of independence granted to the Free State was enough, and they were willing to fight to stabilize that new state. And a lot of people also stayed out of it. There was a whole degree of people who thought that neither side was really fully right. And I think that's how a lot of Irish society saw it subsequently. Before the Civil War starts, in East Cork, the IRA hijacks a British arms ship called the Upnor, and it takes it into Ballycotton. It discharges about 500 rifles, machine guns, explosives, and that really arms the Munster IRA. It's a real key moment because it gives the IRA the weaponry to take on the Free State government. Anti-treaty forces occupied the entire county of Cork. At the outset of the war, they had cleared couple Free State garrisons, one in Listowel, one in Skibbereen, so they dominated the whole area. The National Army launched a series of surprise landings on the Cork coast in 3 locations on a bank holiday Monday. And they came in the middle of the night, and there was a lot of confusion with the IRA, and they were able to land troops at Youghal, at Union Hall in West Cork, and then in the lower harbor of Cork City. Initially, they were going to come all the way up into the city and land at the Ford's factory, but the IRA had kind of hijacked a couple of dredge barges from the Port of Cork, which they mined, and they used those as a block on the river on Loch Mehan, kind of out past Douglas. So the National Army diverted and they landed in Passage West, which was garrisoned by the IRA. They were led by Major General Emmett Dalton, who was a close colleague of Michael Collins, had been kind of a hero of the First World War, probably the best military leader of the Civil War on either side. And he discharged about 400 troops, kind of offloaded them. They faced some pretty serious resistance. There was a lot of firing at them from across the river at Carrigloe. If you know about the harbor, it's like an hourglass, and they landed at the narrow spot in between. So there was cross-channel firing. Probably about 200 or 300 IRA fighters against about 400 National Army troops. So this was a big event. In the battle around Rochestown Passage, you had about 12 National Army soldiers killed and about 5 or 6 IRA volunteers killed. There were probably between 30 and 50 wounded. So it was a pretty significant encounter. That's one of the largest kind of single battles of the Civil War, particularly outside of Dublin. It looked and felt like a real battle, and that's kind of how it would have been perceived at the time. People who grew up out in Douglas and Rochestown often referred to the battlefield, and there were some, there's also a lot of buildings have bullet holes. So if you go to Passage, you'll see bullet holes on a lot of the buildings right down on the waterway. If you go over to Carrigloe, there's a lot of those houses over there have bullet holes everywhere. There's now a museum in Passage West which has kind of foregrounded that story. There was also a number of events to mark the 100th anniversary of the battle down there. So it is in the memory, and definitely a lot more so now than it would have been 20 years ago. The battle in Cork was about 2.5 days, and then the IRA withdrew and the National Army kind of pursued them. And that took place over about a week. On their way out, the IRA burned pretty much every military structure that was of any use. They systematically destroyed the transportation network in order to hinder Free State movements. This is what a lot of people remembered about the Civil War, was this kind of destruction as the IRA retreated, which was militarily justifiable, but it was politically highly unwise because it really antagonized a lot of the local population.
We are talking about the Civil War in North Cork and the Republican retreat from Kilmallock. The Republicans retreated westwards. They were followed in hot pursuit by the Free State forces. The first town the Republicans came to was Charleville. They didn't loot Charleville, but they seized all motor vehicles and all food and headed on their way. The Free State forces came and captured Charleville and saw that Charleville had been prepared for an onslaught. The Imperial Hotel had been sandbagged and Ball's shop had been set up as a field hospital. However, the main body of the Republicans retreated south under Commandant Paddy O'Brien. They captured Buttevant Barracks. They retreated later from Buttevant Barracks and burned the barracks. The Free State forces gave chase. Commandant Flood captured Charleville on the 12th of August, captured Buttevant on the 15th of August. Commandant Galvin headed southwest and captured Liscarroll on the 15th of August and Kanturk on the 16th of August. Mallow was captured on the 15th of August, Newmarket on the 17th of August, and Galvin captured Mill Street on the 19th of August. And the Free State authorities believed, because of this success, that the civil war in North Cork would be over in 3 weeks. That was their belief, but they did not anticipate a severe Republican backlash. The Republicans were fully armed. They had the backing of about 40% of the population. They were led by very experienced guerrilla officers who had great success in the recent past. General Liam Lynch decided that the Republicans should reorganise. He ordered them to change to flying columns as they did in the War of Independence. They set up 3 flying columns with 24 men in each column. It was decided at a meeting in Callahan's in Newtown that they were to make lightning attacks on towns. And the first town they attacked was the town of Charleville. They sneaked in their stocking feet into Charleville and they fired on all Free State positions. They also attacked Newmarket. There was a very serious overnight battle in Newmarket. Not too many people were injured, but there were many Republican losses. They then moved on, and a few days later, they attacked the town of Mill Street. There was a serious battle in a place called Aughrim in Newtown Parish. Commandant Cronin brought a contingent of about 30 men to round up some Republicans who were believed to be in the area. However, Commandant Paddy O'Brien on the Republican side had 120 men, and they routed Cronin's forces and they had to retreat to Charleville. Cronin sought to capture Republicans by sending out patrols into each of the small towns. He had virtually no success. The area was a very Republican area. They supported Commandant Paddy O'Brien, who was from Liscarroll, and his men. Cronin tried to use small-scale sweeps, but he still had very little success, and it was clear that Paddy O'Brien and his men were being told in advance what was going to happen. The Republicans believed that the best way to win North Cork was to destroy infrastructure. Consequently, they knocked telegraph poles, they trenched roads, they felled trees, they also destroyed railway lines to try to curtail the Free State forces. They put charges on the iconic viaduct and blew it. Then they decided to cut the road from the south, and they placed charges under the bridge. The local people gathered in large numbers, led by their parish priest. They knelt on the roadway. There were approximately 150 of them there, and they started saying the 15 decades of the Rosary. Later that night, they were led and joined by the local Protestant rector, and he led his Protestant flock to the other side of the bridge. The Republicans could see that they were in difficulty, so they removed the charges from the bridge. The Free State forces were becoming successful because they were getting information as to where the Republicans were staying overnight. By late November and into December, Republican activity was being severely curtailed and Free State forces were making advances. By spring 1923, the Cork No. 4 Brigade area was the only active area remaining on the Republican side. The attrition that was wrought on Paddy O'Brien and his men by constant activities by Commandant Ned Cronin gradually wore down the morale and the resolve of the columns in the area. Consequently, the men dumped arms and the Civil War gradually fizzled out in the area.
So here in Bantry, between the 29th and 30th of August, there would have been a large battle between the Free State forces and the anti-treaty IRA. As soon as the Free State landed in Union Hall, all the IRA kind of moved out of the town itself and moved into Cahill. Once they moved out, they kind of just started attacking the town in small waves of bursts during the night over like the course of a week or so. And then finally on the 29th of August, in the middle of the night, force of IRA kind of came on the town to finally take it. There was a few deaths around the square, especially the square itself was such a barren place long ago. There was no cars, no nothing like that, so it was just one big open area. And for the IRA to try and move across that area and take the bullets was very tough for them. There would have been, I think, 1 or 2 deaths that way then coming across the square. Gibbs Ross was the commander on the day and he would have been leading the attack from the front, and they had plans to plant a makeshift bomb at the adjacent wall to the post office. But just as they were doing so, then a shot rang out through fanlight and it struck Gibbs Ross in the head, and he died of a brain hemorrhage. Ted Sullivan would have taken command after the point that Gibbs died, and then he decided to retreat from the town because of them losing men, and they retreated back towards the hills of Cahill then. And from that point on, there was never any other attack made on Bantry. There was a battle just outside the town in a place called Gert Row, just between Bantry and Cahill. There would have been a contingent of Free State soldiers going out towards the countryside trying to get an idea of where the Free State were. They kind of met in a point around Drumborough Wood, where the IRA had tactically made a line of defence in the forestry, and a big battle occurred then over the space of 2 days. There was about 200 or so Free State soldiers, and God knows how many hundred IRA above in the forestry. They're kind of all kept in the hills that time, so reinforcements started coming more and more from the tree line. And in the end, the Free State were forced to retreat. And there was no one shot in the attack itself, but there was 2 civilians caught in the crossfire. There was one man called Michael Holland that was only out farming, and he got shot in a field. And another lady called Helena Barry, she was only 26, and she was actually at the door giving milk to some anti-treaty IRA that were on the run. And the Free State spotted them in outside the door and they shot down the house.
My father was in the West Cork Brigade and he was a commandant of it, but he never spoke about it very much to us. So I don't know a great deal about it except what I've read. I heard that there was some stuff up on the archives, so I just researched it and looked up their names, and it was very comprehensive. When you see the landscape around here, like, and see where they were working and what they were up against, and trying to get help from different farmers and that, and when they were on the run. It wasn't talked about in our house. There were a lot of visitors from West Cork and Bantry and that, and they were all people who had been in the brigade with him. But we were always amazed when people came up from Bantry. They would be chatting for hours, but if you went in with tea or anything, you were sent out straight away before they started talking again. They were proud of it, but they didn't want to bring us into it, I think, or something.
Military resistance to the Free State really kind of starts to fizzle out and disappear in early 1923, and by April 23, IRA resistance is pretty much broken, and they kind of unilaterally declare a ceasefire, but they never formally surrender. And that's going to be another issue that's going to continue and kind of be a political issue for generations going forward. When we talk about the repercussions of the Civil War and how people felt about it, I don't think anybody was particularly proud of the Civil War. Both sides did shameful things. Free State government executed at least 3 times as many prisoners in the Civil War than the British had done in the War of Independence. There were all kinds of atrocities on both sides: arson attacks, assassinations, killing of prisoners, and there was kind of enough shame to go around. I think one of the big cliches which is not true, is that the Irish Civil War was never talked about. The Civil War was always talked about. It just wasn't talked about publicly. It was talked about in very careful places with select company, because it was an event that just had this tremendous impact on Irish society, and we're still feeling it in our politics a century later.